Episode 1. The First Drop. It began on a night when the wind forgot how to breathe. The chapel stood silent, a relic carved from faith and fear, where even the candles dared not flicker too loudly. Father Elias had spent the evening hearing confessions, whispers of adultery, theft, envy, sins that dripped into his ears like poison. By midnight, the church was empty, save for him and the cross. He always prayed last, alone, kneeling before the old crucifix that hung above the altar. Elias whispered his usual litany. "Forgive them, Lord, for they know not what they do." But this time his voice cracked, because deep inside he wondered, did he still believe those words? He looked up. The wooden Christ stared back, motionless, lifeless. Yet something about the eyes seemed different. The air around him grew heavy, thick with the scent of iron. Then, from the tip of the carved Savior's hand, a single drop of blood fell. It landed on the altar cloth. Soundless, but Elias swore he heard it. A faint echo, like a heartbeat trapped beneath the floor. He froze. The drop spread slowly, dark and real, staining the linen with a color too vivid to be illusion. He looked for a wound. There was none. The wood was old, cracked, brittle, but dry. Still another drop fell, and another, until the cross itself seemed to breathe, as though exhaling centuries of silence. Elias stumbled backward. "This is not possible," he muttered, clutching his rosary so hard the beads cut into his palm. He wanted to call the bishop, the sacristan, someone, but who believes a priest whose own faith is rotting from within? Then the church began to weep. He heard it, faint, sorrowful sobs echoing through the pews, though no one else was there. The candles flickered, their flames bending toward the crucifix, as if drawn to the bleeding wood. He fell to his knees. "What do you want from me?" he whispered. No answer came, only another drop, and another. He lifted the altar cloth, trembling, and saw that the blood had soaked through the fabric, tracing the shape of a handprint beneath. A human hand, reaching upward from the stone floor. The weeping stopped. The church fell utterly silent again, except for the rhythmic drip, drip, drip from above. Each drop slower than the last, as though the cross itself were dying. Father Elias stayed there until dawn, unable to move, unable to look away. When the sun finally broke through the stained glass, the blood was gone. The altar was clean. Yet, on his own hands, red stains remained, warm to the touch. That morning he locked the church doors, and for the first time in his life, Father Elias did not say Mass. Because deep inside, beneath the guilt, beneath the fear, one terrible thought began to form. What if the cross hadn't been bleeding for them, but for him? Episode 2. The girl who heard the cross cry. The next morning, the church bells did not ring. No one noticed at first. In this small town, silence had become a kind of background noise, the sound of things slowly dying. But for Father Elias, silence now meant something else. It meant the cross was listening. He hadn't slept. The stains on his hands had faded, yet he still felt the warmth, pulsing faintly beneath his skin like a second heartbeat. He told himself it was imagination. He told himself a priest could not be haunted by a miracle. That illusion shattered when the girl arrived. She was no older than 12, a frail orphan named Clara, known around the village for her silence. She had been born deaf, though sometimes the nuns claimed she heard things that weren't meant to be heard. They called it imagination, the kind that frightened adults. That morning, she appeared at the church door before Elias had even unlocked it, clutching a sketchbook. Her eyes were wide, pupils trembling. When he opened the door, she rushed past him, straight toward the altar. She looked up at the crucifix, frozen in place, then began to draw. Elias stood behind her, watching as her pencil moved with frantic precision. No hesitation, no correction, just strokes born of fear. When she finished, she held up the page. It was the cross, bleeding, but not from the hands, from the eyes. Elias felt the air leave his lungs. Clara? Who told you this? She couldn't hear him, but she lifted her small hand and pointed toward the ceiling, then toward her heart. Then she pressed her palm flat against the floorboards where the handprint had been, the one only he had seen. Elias knelt beside her. "Did you see this?" he mouthed slowly. She shook her head. Then, with trembling fingers, she wrote on the page beneath her drawing. "I didn't see it. I heard it cry." A chill raced through his spine. He stared up at the cross. Nothing. Still. Silent. But the child looked terrified, her eyes darting toward the shadow behind the altar. Elias turned sharply, and there, for the briefest moment, he saw it too. A faint shimmer, like heat rising from stone, shaped vaguely like a kneeling figure. It vanished when he blinked. That night, Elias couldn't pray. The girl's drawing burned in his mind. When he finally closed his eyes, the sound came, muffled sobs, echoing through the church corridors. The same weeping as before, only softer, more human. A child's sobs. He rushed to the chapel. There she was, Clara, kneeling before the cross, her small hands pressed together. Tears streamed down her face, and from above, a new drop of blood fell, landing squarely on her forehead. She didn't flinch. Instead, she whispered, though she couldn't possibly hear her own words. "He said he's still bleeding, because you lied." Elias froze. The candles all went out at once, plunging the church into darkness. And in that silence, the cross bled again. Not just red, but black, thick as tar, dripping down like ink from a pen rewriting scripture itself. Episode 3. Confession of a Dead Man. Rain fell like penance that night, steady and merciless, tapping against the stained glass windows of St. Gabriel's church. Father Elias sat inside the confessional, his breath clouding the small, wooden booth. He hadn't opened it since the bleeding began, but tonight he had to. Something deep in him, guilt, curiosity, or maybe madness, whispered that the cross demanded it. He slid open the confessional grate, its rusted hinges sighing like tired bones. No one was there. Still, he waited. Minutes passed. Silence stretched like a wound. Then a breath. Faint. Wrong. Too cold. "Bless me, Father," a voice whispered through the darkness. "For I have sinned." Elias froze. The voice was hoarse, wet, as though crawling through water. He looked to the other side of the confessional. The shadows deepened, coiling in on themselves. "My son," Elias began cautiously. "When was your last confession?" A pause. Then, 40 years ago, in this very booth. Elias's heart stumbled. The church records said this confessional hadn't been used in decades before his arrival. "You've been gone a long time," he said quietly. "Why come now?" "Because you opened the cross again," the voice replied. "I've been waiting beneath it." The air grew heavy, thick with a metallic scent. Elias gripped his rosary. You knew of the cross?" The voice rasped a laugh that wasn't human. "I bled for it, Father. We all did." The candlelight flickered, shadows pulsing across the carved lattice. Elias leaned closer. Through the grate he saw something. A face. Pale, with skin stretched too thin, eyes dark hollows that seemed to weep black tears. And the smell, soil, decay, and old incense. The scent of a grave disturbed. "You should not be here," Elias whispered. "You are not alive." The voice finished for him. "No, neither are you, Father. Not since the day you buried the truth." Elias's hands trembled. "Who are you?" The figure leaned closer. "You absolved me," it said. "You forgave me when heaven would not. You said I was free. You lied." Elias's blood turned to ice. He remembered now a sin long buried. Years ago, a man named Tomas had confessed to killing his wife and child. Elias, young and naive, had believed his remorse. He had granted forgiveness, then sent him away with the words, "Go in peace." The next morning, Tomas was found hanging behind the chapel. His hands were nailed together in prayer. The priest's voice cracked. "Tomas!" "Yes," the dead man breathed. "And you told me God would forgive, but he didn't. He sent me back to remind you. The cross bleeds for lies." Elias staggered out of the booth, gasping for air, but the door wouldn't open. He beat against the wood, shouting prayers that turned to screams. When the confessional finally burst open, the other side was empty. No trace of the man, only a deep, wet stain on the seat, shaped like a human form. And then Elias saw it, carved into the inside wall of the confessional, fresh and dripping red. "Forgive me, Father, for I am you." The candle beside the booth died with a hiss, and in the silence that followed, Elias heard a faint, hollow laugh, coming not from the confessional, but from the cross itself. Episode 4. The Candle That Wouldn't Die. By the fourth night, sleep had become a stranger to Father Elias. The church no longer felt holy. Its walls whispered. Its air tasted of rust and guilt. The cross stood in silence, yet somehow alive, breathing in the dark when no one watched. But what frightened him most wasn't the blood anymore. It was the candle that refused to die. It had begun as a small mercy. After the incident in the confessional, Elias lit a single candle at the base of the altar, a prayer for Tomas's soul, for his own. The flame burned gently, steady as a heartbeat. But when dawn came, it hadn't gone out. He tried to snuff it with his fingers. It burned his skin, but not the flame. He covered it with a chalice. The metal turned hot, glowing faintly from within. He even whispered the old exorcism prayers he'd half forgotten. Still, it burned. By the second night, the flame grew taller. It flickered with strange colors, deep crimson and gold, as if feeding on something unseen. Parishioners began to notice the smell. Not wax, but blood and myrrh. Some called it divine. Elias called it warning. He decided to keep the church locked after sunset. But faith has a way of finding cracks in doors. On the third night, a woman from the village, Maria Duarte, broke into the chapel. Her husband had been missing for 2 days. She said she'd seen him in her dreams, kneeling before the candle. Elias tried to stop her. "Do not go near it," he warned. "That light doesn't come from heaven." But Maria didn't listen. She fell to her knees before the flame, clutching a rosary. "If you are mercy," she cried, "bring him back." The candle flared violently. Shadows twisted up the walls like living smoke. And then, she screamed. Elias ran to her side, but she was already gone. Her body slumped, her lips still moving in silent prayer. The candle, however, shone brighter than ever. When the villagers found her in the morning, they said her face looked peaceful, almost smiling. But Elias knew better. The eyes were open, and in them reflected only fire. He tried to extinguish the candle again that night. He poured holy water, muttered psalms, even struck the wax with his hand. The flame flickered, and a voice whispered through it, "Each time it dies, another soul will take its place." Terrified, Elias stepped back. The blood from the cross dripped down, merging with the wax at the base of the candle. Together they pulsed, red and gold, like veins under skin. He felt it. The church was breathing again. The next morning, news spread. Another villager was found dead. Heart stopped, eyes open, lips burned. Elias lit another candle beside the first one, trembling hands clutching the match. He didn't know why. Perhaps fear, perhaps faith. But deep inside, he realized something dreadful. The cross no longer needed believers to bleed. It had found something new to feed on. Hope. Episode 5. The bells at 3 a.m. It began with the bells. 3 slow tolls that broke the night like thunder inside a tomb. Father Elias woke with a start, his heart pounding in rhythm with the sound. He sat up in his narrow bed, drenched in sweat. The rectory was dark, yet the faint echo of the church bells carried through the stone walls, low, solemn, and unearthly. He checked his clock. 3 a.m., the devil's hour. The bells were old, cracked bronze from another century. They hadn't rung in years, not since the rope had rotted away. He knew that because he had cut the rope himself. So who or what was ringing them now? He threw on his cassock and rushed into the rain. The path to the chapel glistened like black glass. The closer he came, the louder the bells grew. Not just a sound, but a pulse, like something enormous breathing through the tower. When he pushed open the heavy doors, a rush of cold air met him. The candles on the altar were lit, though he had not lit them. And the cross, oh God, the cross was bleeding again, a dark, steady trickle that painted the marble floor in silence. Then he saw them, dozens of shapes kneeling in the pews. Men, women, children, all facing the altar, heads bowed in perfect stillness. Their skin glistened pale beneath the candlelight. "Who's there?" Elias demanded, his voice cracking in the vast, echoing space. No one answered. The bells tolled again, a fourth time now, and with it came a smell he recognized all too well. Decay, mixed with the sweetness of incense. He took a hesitant step forward. The nearest figure, an old man, shifted slightly. Elias's breath caught when the man lifted his head. His eyes were gone. Empty sockets stared toward heaven, and a single line of dried blood ran from each one, curving down to his mouth like tears. The corpse's lips moved. Not a word, just a sound. A groan, a prayer half swallowed by death. Elias stumbled backward. More of them began to move, as if awakened by the sound of the bells. The church filled with faint whispers, a rising chorus of lost souls murmuring through broken mouths. "Why have you come?" he gasped. From somewhere among them, a woman's voice answered, calm, hollow, and ancient. "To finish the mass you never gave." Lightning flashed through the stained glass, illuminating the entire congregation. Every pew filled with the dead of St. Gabriel's parish. Those buried beneath the cemetery for decades now knelt once again, hands clasped, blood dripping between their fingers. Each wore a small cross carved into their flesh, a wound identical to the bleeding crucifix above. Elias fell to his knees. "Lord, deliver us." But his prayer was drowned by the tolling. 5, 6, 7, until the sound became unbearable, shaking the very ground. Then, as suddenly as it began, the bells stopped. The candles died, and in the thick silence that followed, Elias heard a whisper close to his ear. "Next time, Father, we will sing." He turned sharply, but there was no one behind him. Only the echo of rain against the windows, and the faint, ghostly hum of a choir starting to breathe again. When dawn came, the villagers found the church doors open. Inside, every pew was empty, except for one. Father Elias sat in the front row, motionless, staring at the cross, and from the bell tower above, the rope that no longer existed swayed gently, dripping with fresh blood. Episode 6. The Choir of Shadows. Sunday came cloaked in a stillness that felt rehearsed, as if the whole town were holding its breath, waiting for something sacred or terrible. Father Elias stood before the altar, eyes hollow from nights without rest. The memory of the bells still haunted him. They hadn't rung again, yet their echo lingered somewhere deep inside his skull, a heartbeat not his own. The parishioners came hesitantly, fewer than usual. Their faces looked drained, frightened. But among them were children, the ones Elias had called back to rebuild the church choir. They smiled nervously, clutching their hymn books like shields. Elias forced himself to smile back. If they sing, maybe the church will feel alive again, he told himself. Maybe the cross will be still. The rehearsal began at dusk. 12 children stood in 2 neat rows before the altar. The air was faintly warm, heavy with incense. The bleeding had stopped for now. Elias raised his hand, signaling the first hymn. Agnus Dei, Catalis Peccata Mundi. Their voices rose softly, trembling, fragile. And for a moment, the sound was beautiful. Then it changed. The melody twisted. Words began to slur backward, Latin syllables turning strange and sharp, like knives scraping across stone. Elias froze. It wasn't a mistake. Every child was singing perfectly, but the hymn was reversed, flowing from Amen back to Agnus Dei. An invocation turned inside out. The air turned cold. The candles flickered blue. One of the younger boys, Thomas, only 8, stepped forward without breaking rhythm. His eyes rolled white. Blood trickled from his nose. And when he sang, his voice wasn't his own. It was older, deeper. A man's voice. Bless me, Father. The voice intoned through the boy's lips. For I have returned. Elias's rosary fell from his hand. Stop, he shouted. But the choir only grew louder, each child's voice blending into the next until the church vibrated with the sound of prayer and death intertwined. The cross began to bleed again. Thick, black-red tears slid down from the wooden Christ's eyes, dripping onto the floor, onto the children's feet. Still they sang, eyes blank, voices echoing in that same inverted chant. Mundo peccata talis cadei Agnus. Elias grabbed Thomas by the shoulders. Who are you? He demanded. The boy smiled, lips trembling. You know my name, Father. You heard my confession. The voice of Tomas, the man who had confessed murder and returned from the grave. Elias staggered back, his knees giving way. The choir's volume swelled into a storm, the pews shaking, the stained glass humming with unseen vibration. And then, all at once, silence. The children collapsed. One by one, candles went out, smoke curling like ghostly fingers. Elias rushed from one child to the next. Pulse, breathing, life. They were alive. Thank God, alive. But when he opened their hymn books, the pages were blank, except for one line scrawled in something dark and wet. The choir has been chosen. That night, long after the parents had taken their children home, Elias sat alone before the altar. The cross no longer bled, but faintly, from somewhere deep beneath the floorboards, he could still hear the echo of that reversed hymn, sung softly, like a lullaby from hell. And though he was alone, 12 shadows knelt behind him, each the height of a child. Episode 7. The Mother's Curse. The following night, thunder rolled over St. Gabriel like a warning. The sky above the chapel was black and bruised, streaked with veins of lightning that illuminated the church tower, and the cross, glinting red where it shouldn't. Father Elias hadn't left the altar in 2 days. The children's reversed hymn still echoed in his mind, a melody that refused to die. He prayed until his voice broke, yet the silence that followed was worse than any answer. That's when the knock came. 3 sharp raps on the heavy church door. He hesitated. No one came to the chapel this late. Not since the bells, not since the candle that burned on its own. But the knocking came again, louder this time, almost desperate. Elias opened the door. An old woman stood in the rain, soaked to the bone, clutching a rosary so tightly the beads had cut into her hands. Her eyes were wild, not with madness, but with grief. You're the priest, she said, her voice trembling. You're the one who makes the dead speak. Elias felt his blood run cold. Who told you that? She raised her trembling hand, pointing toward the cemetery behind the church. He did. At first, Elias didn't understand until he saw it. A small shape standing in the downpour among the gravestones. A child, still, watching. My son, the woman whispered. He died last winter, but last night, I heard him singing. The same hymn your choir sang. Elias shook his head. Madam, what you heard was... But the woman stepped closer, her voice rising. Don't lie to me, Father. You brought something back. You made them sing with the dead." Her words were knives, cutting through the air between them. Elias tried to calm her, but the look in her eyes was already beyond reason. A mother's grief sharpened into something darker. "I want him back," she said. "You brought back others. Bring back my son." "I can't." She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't belong to the living. "Then I'll ask the one who can." She turned from him, walking barefoot down the aisle toward the cross. Rain dripped from her dress, forming dark puddles on the stone floor. Elias followed, pleading, "Stop, that's not God's will." But she was already kneeling before the altar, hands lifted, eyes shut. "If you can bleed, you can hear me," she whispered. "Give him back to me, or take me instead." The candle at the base of the cross flared to life, the eternal one that had refused to die. Its flame stretched higher, bending toward her as if answering. The wind howled through the broken window panes. Elias shouted a prayer, reaching for her arm, and then everything stopped. The flame dimmed. The woman's body went limp, falling backward into his arms. Her eyes were open, glassy. Her lips still moved, barely, whispering the same Latin the children had sung in reverse. "Agnus Dei, Catalis peccata mundi." Then silence. Elias laid her down gently, heart pounding. He looked toward the cross. The blood was flowing again, thicker this time, running down in streams that pooled around her body. And there, just behind the altar, a small figure stood, the boy from the cemetery, smiling faintly through the veil of candlelight. "Thank you, Father," he said softly. She prayed loud enough. The candle went out. When dawn came, they found only the mother's rosary on the floor. Beads melted, chain fused into the shape of a small cross. The woman was gone. So was her son. But that night, every mother in the village dreamed of a woman kneeling beneath a bleeding crucifix, whispering, "A mother's curse is the prayer God always hears." Episode 8. The Stained Confessional. By now, Father Elias no longer feared the bleeding of the cross. He feared the silence that came after. The church had grown restless, it breathed. Every night, the candles flickered without wind. The doors creaked as if unseen hands brushed against them. The scent of myrrh had turned into the sour smell of rust. The dead were closer now. He could feel them behind every prayer. He tried to find comfort in routine. Morning mass, confessions, the sacred rhythm that once defined his faith. But the villagers had stopped coming. Only one place in the church still called to him, the old confessional. It sat in the corner, shadowed and forgotten. The same booth where the dead man's voice had first returned. That night, Elias decided to cleanse it. He brought holy water, a brush, and trembling hands. The moment he stepped inside, the air changed. Cold, thick, breathing. He touched the wood and it was wet, sticky. When he held up the lantern, he saw it. Dark streaks running down the paneling, soaking the grain of the wood. Blood, not fresh but not old either. And the strangest part, it wasn't dripping down. It was seeping out, from inside the wood itself, as though the confessional were bleeding from within. He whispered a prayer, but the words caught in his throat. He reached for the brush to scrub it clean, but as he pressed it against the wall, the blood moved. It spread, curling upward, forming letters, shaky, uneven, written by something that had never learned how to hold a pen. The first word appeared, he, then another, forgave. Then the rest followed in jagged, dripping script. He forgave what was unforgivable. Elias dropped the brush. The phrase pulsed faintly, as if the words themselves had a heartbeat. He stumbled out of the booth, clutching his chest. "No," he whispered. "Not that, not again." He knew exactly what it meant. Years ago, before the bleeding began, he had heard the confession of a man who had done something monstrous. Something Elias had buried deep beneath his vows, his faith, his silence. He had granted absolution that night, but he should not have. He turned toward the altar and froze. The cross was bleeding again. Not slow, not subtle. It poured, cascading down the figure of Christ like a waterfall of red. The floor beneath it glistened, slick with blood that seemed endless. And then came the voice, not from the confessional this time, but from everywhere. From the walls, from the rafters, from the very air itself. "You forgave him," it said, low and cold. "You unchained the one who damned us all." Elias fell to his knees. "God have mercy," he gasped. The voice laughed softly. Not cruel, not mocking, but tired. "There is no mercy left here." The confessional door creaked open behind him. He turned slowly, knowing he shouldn't. Inside, where the priest would sit, the shape of a man waited, head bowed, hands clasped, his robes blackened with rot. The shape lifted its head, and Elias saw his own face staring back at him. "Absolve me," it whispered. Blood ran down its chin. "Before the cross runs dry." The lantern shattered in his hand. Darkness swallowed the church whole. When morning came, the villagers found the confessional doors wide open. Inside, the wood was clean again. No blood, no stains, no message. Only a single sentence carved deep into the seat, burned into the grain like a brand. The priest forgave what even God could not. And from that day on, the confessional never stayed empty. Every night at 3 a.m., someone could be heard whispering inside, a confession that had no end. Episode 9. The Man with No Reflection. The morning came pale and cold, a gray breath over the town that never seemed to wake. The church doors had been closed for days. Father Elias prayed, but no answer came, only the slow groan of the timbers and the soft drip of blood that refused to dry. But on the 7th day, the bleeding stopped. It happened at noon without warning. One moment, the crucifix was weeping red tears. The next, the flow ceased entirely. The silence that followed was almost holy, and somehow far more terrifying. That same afternoon, a man arrived. He came walking down the cobblestone road, dressed in a black suit that looked older than he was. No carriage, no dust on his shoes, not even the echo of his steps. The villagers watched from behind shutters as he crossed the square and stopped before the chapel gates. He smiled once, a faint, polite smile that didn't touch his eyes, then entered. Elias stood at the altar, frozen mid-prayer. The man bowed his head. "Forgive my intrusion, Father. I heard your church is blessed." Elias hesitated. "You mean cursed?" The man's smile widened. "That depends on who's speaking." He stepped forward. His presence carried no sound, no weight. Yet the candles near him flickered, shrinking back as if afraid. "Are you a pilgrim?" Elias asked. "Of sorts," the man said. "I travel where miracles die, and I heard yours has been bleeding." Elias stared. "Not anymore." The man's expression darkened with something like amusement. "Then my timing is perfect." He looked up at the crucifix, eyes gleaming. "It's resting. Even miracles grow tired of being misunderstood." The words slithered into Elias's mind like smoke. He stepped closer, his fingers tightening around the rosary. "Who are you?" The man turned to face him fully. His eyes were the color of ash, not lifeless, but ancient. "Names are for men who fear being forgotten," he said softly. "But if you must call me something, call me the witness." Elias felt a shiver crawl up his spine. "Witness to what?" "To every sin you've buried beneath this church," the man replied. "To the one you forgave that heaven would not." The priest staggered back. "You!" But the man moved closer, too close, and that's when Elias saw it, reflected faintly in the golden chalice beside the altar. His own image. But the man's? Nothing. The space where the stranger should have been was empty. Elias's mouth went dry. "You cast no reflection." The witness smiled, teeth too white, too still. Neither does God. He walked toward the cross, laying a single hand upon it. For the first time in weeks, no blood fell. The wood was dry beneath his touch, the air suddenly still, the silence almost peaceful. Then he looked back at Elias, voice low and steady. "Tell me, Father, when a man forgives what cannot be forgiven, do you think he saves a soul or creates one?" The candles extinguished themselves. Only the dim light of dusk remained, spilling through the stained glass like bruised sunlight. When it returned, when Elias blinked, the man was gone. The church stood quiet, the cross still, but behind the altar, in the basin of holy water, the surface rippled, and a reflection stared back at Elias that wasn't his own. He smiled, and whispered, "The witness has come to listen." Episode 10. The Black Host. The next Sunday, the church was full for the first time in months. They came because the bleeding had stopped. They came because the word miracle spread faster than rot. And Father Elias, trembling behind the altar, wanted to believe it too. He had not seen the man called the Witness since that day, yet his presence clung to the church like a shadow that refused to fade. The cross stood still, dry and silent, watching. Elias whispered the opening prayer. His voice echoed strange in the vaulted space, like it was being repeated back to him by something unseen. When it came time for the Eucharist, he raised the golden ciborium, the container of the consecrated hosts, and froze. The wafers were not white, they were black, not burnt, not molded, black like ash, black like something that had never known light. The congregation shifted uneasily. Elias blinked hard, whispering to himself that it was a trick of the candles, a trick of exhaustion. He forced a smile. Corpus Christi. He lifted one of the hosts, felt wrong, heavy, damp. It stuck to his fingers, leaving a faint smear that looked almost oily. He placed it on his own tongue. The taste hit him like lightning, metal, rust, blood. The moment it touched his mouth, something ancient and bitter spread through him. Not pain, but memory. Sins he'd never committed flashed behind his eyes. A man strangling his wife, a woman burying her newborn, a soldier burning a chapel. Each sin whispered in a voice that wasn't his but spoke through his soul. He gasped and dropped the ciborium. The hosts scattered across the marble floor like black coins, rolling beneath pews. The congregation began to cry out. One by one, they clutched their throats, coughing, choking, until their screams filled the sanctuary. Blood poured from their mouths, thick, bright, red. Elias stumbled backward. The pews shook as if something beneath them had come alive. The people's cries became a chorus of agony and prayer tangled together. "Father, Father, help us!" He fell to his knees. "God, forgive me," he whispered. "Please forgive me." The candles exploded. The cross above the altar began to tremble, its wood cracking with a sound like breaking bones. And then it began to bleed again. But this time, the blood did not fall downward. It flowed upward, pulled toward the ceiling, defying gravity, drawn by something unseen. The church filled with a wind that had no source. The windows rattled violently. The air reeked of iron and death. And through it all, a voice spoke, soft, amused, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. "The body of Christ," it said, "and the blood of the witness." The storm ended as suddenly as it began. When the doors were opened the next morning, the townspeople found the church empty. No parishioners, no priest, only hundreds of black hosts scattered across the floor, and wherever one had landed, the marble had cracked open like skin blistered by fire. On the altar lay a single chalice. Inside it, still warm, was wine the color of midnight. And beneath the chalice, written in something dark and dry, were 6 words that no one in the town could ever forget. They ate faith, and faith ate them. Episode 11. The Book of Unwritten Sins. The church was dead. Not empty, dead. The candles had melted into gray stumps. The air hung heavy with the smell of wine and rust, and every echo sounded like it came from another world. Father Elias wandered the aisles like a ghost searching for its grave. The blood on the marble had dried into dark veins that webbed across the floor, as though the chapel itself had sprouted arteries. He hadn't slept since the Black Host. The faces of his parishioners haunted him, mouths red, eyes pleading, before dissolving into shadow. Only the cross remained silent, watching him with the indifference of God. He told himself he would leave, burn the church if he must. But that night something new appeared. It was near midnight when Elias heard it, the soft rustle of pages turning. The sound came from beneath the altar. He approached slowly, lantern trembling in his grip. The stone beneath the crucifix had cracked open days ago, revealing a narrow, hollow space. He crouched down and saw it. A book resting on the cold ground, untouched by dust or time. Its cover was bound in black leather, smooth as skin, sealed with a tarnished clasp in the shape of a cross. Elias lifted it, feeling it breathe. The air around it pulsed faintly, like the heartbeat of something buried. The title burned into the cover was written in Latin, Liber Peccatorum non scriptum, the Book of Unwritten Sins. He opened it. The pages were blank, every one of them, until he turned to the center. There, faint ink began to crawl across the parchment, forming letters trembling like they were alive. Names appeared one by one. The villagers, their confessions, their secrets. Each sin written out in excruciating detail. Lies, affairs, theft, murder. Things even Elias had never been told. He flipped the pages in horror. The ink moved as if it were thinking, still writing even as he watched. And with each new sin, he could hear a whisper in the air, the voice of the person being written about, pleading, sobbing, confessing. When he reached the last page, his hands froze. His own name appeared at the top, Elias Marrow. Beneath it, the ink bled into words that formed before his eyes. He forgave what was unforgivable. He silenced what heaven demanded to be spoken. He wears the blood of another man's salvation. Elias stumbled backward, the book still open. No, he whispered. No, I repented. I confessed. The ink spread faster now, bleeding across the page, letters twisting into new sentences. Your confession was never heard, because you never spoke it to God. The lantern flickered violently. A wind rose inside the church, though no doors were open. The pages turned on their own, whipping faster and faster until the entire book seemed to scream. And then silence. The pages stopped. Elias looked down and saw his own handwriting covering the final line. Forgive me, for I have become my sin. He dropped the book. It hit the ground with a sound too heavy for paper, like a heart being thrown onto stone. The cover slammed shut, and the clasp sealed itself with a hiss. The following morning, villagers found Elias kneeling before the altar, head bowed, hands folded. He looked peaceful, until they saw his eyes, wide open, staring at the floor where a single sentence had been burned into the marble in Latin. The book writes until no one is left to read. Episode 12. The crucifix turns away. By the 12th night, the air in St. Gabriel's had grown so still that even time seemed afraid to pass. No birds sang near the steeple anymore. The bells, once cursed to ring on their own, now hung silent, as if even they had lost faith in sound. Father Elias sat alone before the altar, the book of unwritten sins resting shut beside him. He had tried burning it, burying it, drowning it. Each time it returned to the same place, beneath the crucifix, warm as if something inside it still lived. He had stopped praying. He didn't dare speak the name of God anymore, because lately God had started answering back. Not in mercy, but in silence. That night he noticed it. At first he thought it was a trick of the light. The lantern's glow was faint, flickering across the carved face of Christ. But then he realized The eyes of the crucifix were no longer looking down at him. They were turned away. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. The Savior's face had turned slightly toward the wall, away from the altar, away from Elias, as if refusing to see him. His breath caught. No, no, no! He climbed the steps to the altar, reaching out trembling fingers. The wood was cold, colder than it should have been. Why? He whispered. What have I done now? The candle nearest him flared violently, and with that light came something worse, the faint outlines of footprints on the marble floor. Bare feet, wet, trailing crimson behind them. They led from the entrance all the way to the base of the cross, and stopped beneath it. Elias fell to his knees. Please, Lord, do not abandon me. A sound echoed in response, soft at first, like weeping, then heavier, closer. From the pews behind him came the scrape of wood, the shuffle of feet. Elias turned, and his heart broke. The congregation had returned. Men, women, children, the same faces he had buried, the same parishioners who had screamed during the Black Host. They sat in perfect silence, heads bowed, hands folded in prayer. Their skin was pale, their mouths slightly open, whispering words without sound. Elias backed away, clutching the crucifix. You're not real. You can't be. A voice cut through the quiet, soft and familiar, the voice of the witness. Of course they're real, Father. Faith never dies. It only decays. He appeared beside the last pew, his smile faint, his reflection absent in the candlelight. They prayed for your redemption. And now look, even he refuses to look upon you. Elias turned back to the cross. The figure of Christ had turned farther, fully now, gazing toward the dark corner of the church, its carved eyes hollow, its mouth cracked as if mid-scream. And then, impossibly, the arms of the crucifix began to shift. The hands that once spread in blessing twisted inward, the nails pulling loose, wood groaning like a tree breaking under its own weight. The cross moved. Elias screamed, stumbling backward. The congregation did not flinch. They were still praying, their lips moving faster now, their whispers turning into a rush of wind. A single endless word. Abandoned. 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 He fell at the base of the altar. Forgive me. Please, I never meant. The witness stepped closer, eyes glowing faintly. He heard you, Father. That's the problem. The church went dark. A sound like tearing wood filled the air, the cross wrenching free from its mount. The statue's head snapped fully aside, facing the wall as though disgusted. And in the dark, Elias heard the voice again. Not from above, but from behind him. A whisper, weary and final. I turned away because you asked me to watch. The lanterns burst, drowning the church in shadows. When dawn broke, the villagers found the chapel empty. The crucifix lay on the ground, turned face down, and on the back of the wooden Christ, written in blood too fresh to have dried overnight, were 6 words. The shepherd has lost his flock. Episode 13. The saint who wept fire. The nights had grown longer since the crucifix turned away. Even the moon refused to shine through the church windows now, as if light itself had chosen exile. Father Elias lived in a haze of incense, ash, and guilt. His prayers no longer rose. They fell back upon him, heavy as stones. The cross remained face down, its presence suffocating in its silence. And yet, despite the dead air of faith, something new began to stir inside St. Gabriel's. It started with a smell. Not the metallic scent of blood that had haunted the chapel for weeks. This was different. Smoke, sweet, almost fragrant, the scent of burning myrrh and flesh. Elias followed it through the side corridor to the old chapel of Saint Veronica. She had always been his comfort, the saint who wiped the face of Christ, who bore witness to his pain. Her marble statue stood with her veil outstretched, frozen in compassion. But tonight she was weeping. From her stone eyes dripped not water, but thin rivulets of molten fire, amber, glowing, whispering as they fell. The flames did not scorch the floor. They spread, slithering across the tiles like living serpents of light. Elias fell to his knees. "No, not you too." The fire pooled around the base of the statue, swirling, forming patterns. Faces, dozens of faces flickering within the glow. Faces he knew. The congregation, the children, Maria Duarte. They emerged in the flames, their mouths open in silent cries, their eyes glistening with grief. "Father Elias," they whispered together, voices overlapping like a choir sung backward. "You blessed our suffering. You gave mercy to the damned." He backed away, clutching his rosary until it broke in his hands. I tried to save you," the fire hissed, curling upward. From the veil of Saint Veronica rose a column of smoke, shaping itself into something almost human. It hovered inches above the priest, eyes burning with the same orange light that licked the statue's tears. "Then why?" the voice asked, his own voice, twisted by the crackle of flame. "Do they burn for you?" Elias screamed as the air ignited around him. The flames did not touch his skin, but they entered him, curling through his chest, his lungs, his veins. He saw visions through the fire, a confessional drowning in blood, children singing backward, the crucifix twisting away in shame. "Please," he gasped, falling against the wall. "End it. I can't bear it anymore." The fiery vision of Veronica leaned close, her lips nearly touching his ear. "Confession cannot save you anymore," she whispered. "Only witness." The word struck him like a brand. Witness. The fire roared suddenly upward, swallowing the chapel in a storm of gold and red. The heat should have killed him, but it didn't. It only burned the air, the pews, the stone, leaving behind not ashes, but carvings scorched into every surface. Eyes. Hundreds of them. Watching. Weeping flame. When morning came, the statue of Saint Veronica stood blackened but unbroken. Her veil was gone, melted away, and in its place upon the wall behind her was the faint shape of a man, outlined entirely in soot. Father Elias was nowhere to be found. But the villagers who entered that chapel at dusk swore they saw something move inside the fire-carved eyes. Tiny flickers of red light that blinked when no one was looking. And when the wind passed through the broken windows, they heard his voice carried on the smoke. "Forgive me, Saint Veronica. I have become the flame that cannot pray." Episode 14. The mirror behind the altar. The night after Saint Veronica's fire, the church smelled of smoke and sorrow. The walls were scorched with eyes that never blinked, and Father Elias swore he could feel them follow him wherever he moved. They wept light during the day and whispered in the dark. He tried to seal the chapel, but the door refused to close. Its hinges groaned like lungs still drawing breath. The flames might have died, but their reflection remained, trembling faintly across the altar like a memory that refused to burn out. Elias could no longer tell what was real. His prayers had become arguments, his faith a fever, yet something stronger than fear pulled him back to the altar that night. Not God, not hope, something beneath both. He brought a lantern and a hammer. He was going to tear the church open. The back wall of the altar was older than the rest of St. Gabriel's. Stone blackened by age, patched with plaster that didn't match. Elias had always found it strange, but never dared to touch it. Until now, he pried loose the first slab, coughing as dust poured from the crack. Behind it, the faint glint of glass caught his eye. He tore away another stone, and another. Within minutes, the wall gave way, revealing a surface so smooth it shimmered like water in candlelight. A mirror, tall, perfect, buried for centuries behind the altar. He stared into it and saw nothing. No face, no cassock, no cross behind him, just a black emptiness stretching backward forever. He reached out a trembling hand. The glass rippled beneath his touch, cool and wet like the surface of a river. Then, slowly, an image began to form. Himself, but not as he was. This Elias smiled. His eyes were bright, his robes spotless. He stood in a version of the church unscarred by fire or blood, bathed in sunlight. And yet, in his hands, he held something that turned Elias's stomach. A knife, slick and red. The mirrored Elias lifted it to his lips, kissed the blade, and whispered, "Peace be with you." Elias stumbled back. The lantern wavered, light trembling on the glass, and then the reflection moved first. It raised its hand, not mirroring him, but beckoning. "Come closer," it said. The voice was his own, only calmer, holier. Elias shook his head. "You're not me." "Of course I am," the reflection said. "I'm what you'd have become if you had never doubted him." The mirrored church darkened. Shapes appeared behind the smiling version of himself. Parishioners kneeling, hands clasped, mouths open in silent devotion. But their eyes were hollow, black pits that gleamed with something inside them. Something hungry. Elias turned to run, but the air grew heavy. The mirror pulsed, warping the world around it. He heard whispers, his own voice, multiplied, coming from every reflection. "Confess it. Finish it. Replace me." The glass bulged outward like a lung filling with air. Then it cracked from the center, spreading in fine red lines that glowed like veins. Through those fractures, Elias saw countless versions of himself staring back, each holding a different sin. A chalice of blood, a broken child's toy, a torch, a noose, and every single one was smiling. Elias screamed, swinging the hammer against the mirror. It shattered, yet no glass fell. Instead, the shards dissolved into air, leaving behind an open doorway, black and endless, breathing softly like a sleeping beast. From that darkness, a hand reached out, pale, familiar, his own. It brushed his face gently, and a voice whispered, "Now we're even, Father. You've watched enough. It's your turn to be seen." The lantern died. When morning came, the altar wall was whole again, the mirror gone, but behind the crucifix, faint as mist, a reflection still shimmered, watching anyone who dared to kneel too long. And if one looked closely, the reflection of Father Elias could still be seen there, trapped on the other side of the glass, mouthing the same words over and over. "Peace be with you." Episode 15. The Nun Without Eyes. The nights in St. Gabriel's had grown cruel. Wind clawed at the chapel walls, the candles refused to burn, and Father Elias no longer trusted the rhythm of his own heartbeat. It felt borrowed, a sound lent to him by something waiting to take it back. He had not spoken since the mirror. Sometimes he heard his own voice echoing in the rafters when he prayed, as though the reflection he'd destroyed still whispered prayers in his place. He knew what it wanted, to trade silence for sight. That trade came 3 nights later. It began with singing, a voice soft, feminine, impossibly pure, rising through the storm outside. It drifted through the broken windows like incense smoke, carrying a hymn Elias hadn't heard since his childhood, Ave Verum Corpus. He lit his lantern and followed the sound through the nave, each note threading deeper into the dark. When he reached the altar, the voice stopped. Then, from the far end of the church, another candle flared to life on its own. A figure knelt before the cross, a woman in a black habit, veil long enough to brush the stone floor. Her hands were clasped, her posture humble, motionless. Elias froze. He hadn't seen a nun in St. Gabriel's for years. "Who are you?" he whispered. She didn't answer. Slowly, she rose to her feet, her head tilted slightly, like she was listening to a sound only she could hear. "I came to confess," she said at last. Her voice was calm, too calm, like a bell ringing underwater. "Confess?" Elias asked, stepping closer. "Sister, the hour is late." I have been waiting since the walls were white, she interrupted. Since before you learned how to pray. Elias felt a chill crawl down his spine. The candlelight trembled. What is it you wish to confess? The nun turned toward him. Her veil fell away. Beneath it was no face, only pale skin, smooth and hollow where eyes should have been. The sockets were sealed with thin scars, as though the flesh had been stitched long ago. Yet somehow Elias felt her looking at him, not with sight, but with knowledge. He staggered back. Mother of God, you made me blind to the truth, she whispered. You took my eyes so I would not see what you did beneath his gaze. Elias shook his head, trembling. No, I've never. But she stepped closer, and the sound of her bare feet against stone echoed like the ticking of a clock counting down. You absolved my murderer, she said, voice breaking into something almost human. You called him forgiven. You said God will see no more of his sin. So I became his blindness. Her words sliced through him. He remembered now the rumor from years ago. A nun strangled by a man she'd tried to save. Elias had given that man absolution. He had thought it mercy. You lied for him, she hissed. And heaven closed its eyes. The candles around them burst into flame, one after another, casting wild shadows that danced across the pews. The nun lifted her hands, empty, but the air around her shimmered with heat, like invisible threads of fire were weaving themselves between her fingers. Let me see, she said. Elias tried to run, but the church doors slammed shut. Darkness swallowed everything except her burning silhouette. He fell to his knees, crying, I beg you. I only meant to save souls. She knelt before him, close enough that he could smell the ash clinging to her habit. Then, with a voice as gentle as a prayer, she whispered, You saved none. You only hid them from the light. Her hands reached toward his face, cold, soft, and pressed against his eyes. Pain exploded behind his eyelids, searing, blinding. He screamed as darkness rushed in, swallowing the world. When the morning came, the villagers found the church doors open once more. Inside, the air smelled of wax and salt. On the altar, Father Elias lay unconscious. His eyes gone, 2 trails of dried blood marking his cheeks like tears. Beside him knelt a statue that no one had ever seen before. A nun carved of black stone, her face lifted heavenward, hands clasped as if still praying. Her eyes were wide open, and she was crying. Episode 17, The Silent Mass. The sun rose blood-red over St. Gabriel's. It had been months, or perhaps moments, since anyone had dared enter the chapel. The bells had fallen silent, the saints had wept their last, and Father Elias had become something caught between a prayer and a curse. He could no longer see. His eyes were gone, yet he knew the shape of the church by heart, by the rhythm of his steps, by the sound of his breath bouncing off cold stone, by the heartbeat he sometimes heard pulsing through the floor. That morning it beat louder. It was calling him to Mass. He put on his vestments with trembling hands. They were torn and stiff with dried blood, but he wore them like armor. The chalice was cracked. The altar cloth still bore stains that no amount of holy water could cleanse. Still, he whispered, The Lord be with you, though he had no one left to answer. But someone did. 100 voices spoke at once, soft, distant, inhuman. They echoed through the church walls like wind through bone. Elias turned toward the sound, though his ruined eyes saw only the shadow of movement. They were back. The pews filled one by one with the congregation he thought long dead. Men, women, children, all pale, all silent, all watching him with eyes that no longer reflected light. They sat perfectly still, lips closed, their presence heavy as stone. Elias's voice trembled. You've returned to worship? No reply. He stepped behind the altar. Then let us pray. He raised the chalice. The liquid inside, once wine, shimmered dark and thick. He poured it into the cup, his hands shaking, and lifted it high. In the name of the Father. He stopped. A sound filled the air. Not speech, but breath. Every figure in the pews exhaled at once. A long, low sigh that rolled through the nave like thunder. The candles flickered out. The crucifix above the altar turned its head. Slowly, almost gently, as if to watch what came next. Elias tried again. In the name of the Son. But his voice broke. His throat closed. The words wouldn't form. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Panic surged through him. He clutched his throat, gasping. Yet there was no breath, no cry, no prayer. And then he realized no one could speak. The entire church had fallen into a silence so complete that it roared in his skull. Even his heartbeat stopped. Still, he moved through the motions of the Mass. Pouring, raising, breaking, offering, all in silence. The congregation mirrored him perfectly, their mouths moving in pantomime of prayer, their gestures exact, mechanical. When he lifted the host, black, like the ones from the Cursed Communion, something impossible happened. Every soul in the church rose to their feet at once, their chairs scraping in perfect unison. They knelt, heads bowed, as though awaiting salvation. Elias's hands shook. "This is my body," he mouthed, though no sound escaped. He placed the host on his tongue. The silence shattered. A scream, not his, erupted inside his mind. 1,000 screams. The voices of every soul he had buried, every sin he had absolved, every lie he had forgiven. They filled him, tore through him, spoke through him. His body convulsed. Blood poured from his mouth, his ears, his empty eyes. The chalice shattered against the floor. But the congregation, his congregation, remained kneeling, perfectly still, perfectly silent, as if waiting for the final amen. And then, from somewhere deep within the storm of screams, one clear voice rose. A child's. "Finish it, Father." Elias collapsed to his knees. His lips moved, trembling. He mouthed the words, "Amen." The candles reignited all at once. Every soul in the pews burst into ash. The silence returned, vast, eternal. Only Father Elias remained, slumped before the altar, blood pooling beneath him like a final offering. The cross above no longer wept, it smiled. And somewhere, faintly, in the hollow where sound used to be, a whisper lingered. The Mass is over, but the silence has just begun. Episode 18. The Inverted Cross. The storm came without warning. No clouds, no thunder, no wind. Just a roar that seemed to rise from beneath the earth itself, shaking the bones of St. Gabriel's church. Lightning split the sky above the chapel tower, and for the first time in living memory, the villagers looked up from their shuttered homes and saw fire in the shape of a cross blazing against the heavens. Inside, Father Elias awoke to the sound of bells. He hadn't heard them since the night the dead came to pray, yet now they rang again, wild and frantic, as though the tower itself were screaming. He staggered from the floor where he'd fallen after the silent Mass, every limb aching, every breath raw. The church trembled around him. The candles flared one by one, not gold, but red, staining the walls in pulsating light, and the cross above the altar was turning. He saw it first in a shiver, then a twist. The crucifix began to move, slow, deliberate, until the figure of Christ hung upside down. The nails tore loose, the wood groaned, the blood began to flow again, not downward, but upward, toward the rafters, as if heaven itself were rejecting it. Elias dropped to his knees. "Stop," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Please, no more." But faith had long stopped listening. The doors of the church burst open, wind howling through the aisles. The villagers poured in, drawn by the light and the sound, their faces pale, eyes wide. They found Elias kneeling before the altar, his hands raised as if in surrender. The floor split beneath him. Cracks spread like veins, spilling red light from below. The air burned. "Father!" someone cried. "What have you done?" Elias turned toward them, his face hollow, his blind eyes weeping blood. "I tried to save you," he whispered. "I tried to make him listen." A thunderclap shook the tower. The bells rang again. But this time they didn't swing. They screamed. The villagers looked up just in time to see the steeple burst open in a torrent of crimson lightning. The cross atop it tore free, twisting midair before crashing downward through the roof. When the smoke cleared, the world seemed to hold its breath. There, hanging from the shattered beams, was the cross, inverted, and nailed to it was Father Elias, alive. Blood ran down his arms where the nails pinned him in place. His body shuddered with every breath, yet his face was serene, almost radiant. His lips moved slowly, soundlessly at first, until a low hum filled the air. It wasn't pain. It was music, a hymn. No one recognized it. It wasn't Latin, nor any language known to man. The words fell from his mouth like fragments of a forgotten prayer, each one burning in the air before fading to ash. The villagers screamed, crossing themselves, some fleeing, some frozen. Yet they couldn't look away. The bleeding from the cross had stopped entirely. The church, once a wound in the world, had gone utterly still. Elias opened his mouth wider. The hymn grew louder, and behind him, from the inverted crucifix, eyes began to open in the wood. Hundreds of them, watching, crying, laughing. "Father Elias!" someone shouted. "Come down!" He smiled weakly, blood dripping onto his chest. "I finally understand," he said. His voice echoed like 1,000 voices overlapping. It wasn't me he wanted. The roof exploded in light, a blinding, soundless flash that turned night into day. When the villagers awoke, the storm was gone. The church stood in ruins. The crucifix lay on the floor, split in half. But Father Elias's body was never found. Only one thing remained. A pattern burned into the stone where he had hung, an upside-down cross made of ash. And at its center, faint but legible, were words written in dried blood. "Faith begins where God looks away." Episode 19. The Last Confession. There are no more bells, no more storms, only the hush that follows after God has stopped listening. For 3 nights, the ruins of St. Gabriel's stood untouched. The villagers avoided the hill, whispering prayers they no longer believed in. The church was a wound the earth refused to close. And then, on the 4th night, someone heard a voice, faint, drifting through the hollow air. A voice they all knew, Father Elias. But he was dead. The sound came from the confessional, or what remained of it. A skeleton of splintered wood, blackened by lightning. Yet from inside, a whisper pulsed, rhythmic, steady, like a heartbeat turned to words. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." The villagers gathered outside, listening. Some swore the air turned colder, that the ground itself trembled. Others claimed the blood in their veins slowed with every word. Inside the booth sat no priest, no penitent, only shadow. Yet the voice carried as though the church itself were speaking. "I was never meant to forgive," it said. "I was meant to confess." The whisper deepened. It wasn't just Elias anymore. It was layered. Hundreds of voices, male and female, child and elder, rising and falling like waves over his. "I lied to you," he said. "All of you. I wore his robes but never bore his mark." The wood of the confessional creaked, bending as though something inside it was shifting. "I was never ordained," the voice continued. "I was a thief of grace. I took it for myself. I thought if I could speak his words, I could undo the silence he left in me." A faint wind stirred the ashes on the altar. The cracked chalice rolled, clinking once against the marble. But I was wrong. The confession grew louder now, echoing through every beam and broken wall. I made a pact beneath this cross. I said I would save souls, no matter the cost. And when he did not answer, something else did. The villagers stepped back, terror rising in their throats. I said, "Let me carry the weight of sin. Let me forgive what heaven cannot." He laughed then, not madly but softly, the laugh of a man remembering his own ruin. And it said yes. The cross, fallen and inverted, began to bleed once more. Not red, but black, thick as oil, seeping upward into the air. The blood shaped itself into words across the walls, each one burning before it faded. He forgave what was unforgivable. He silenced what was meant to be spoken. He prayed until heaven bled. Inside the booth, Elias's voice cracked. I thought I could take their sins. I thought if I bore them, they would be freed. But faith doesn't erase sin, it breeds it. I made the cross bleed, because I bled for myself. The church shook. The villagers fled. Still, the voice went on. I confess, I never wanted to save anyone. I wanted to be seen. I wanted him to look at me. Then came a silence so deep it swallowed sound itself. Moments later, the confessional doors burst open. Not outward, but inward, collapsing like lungs expelling their final breath. And there, upon the seat, lay a single object, a heart. Not human, wooden, carved, bound with rosary beads and nails. Pulsed once, twice, then stopped. From the walls, a whisper echoed one last time. Absolution is not forgiveness. It's remembering who you sinned for. When the villagers returned the next day, the confessional was gone. Only the altar remained, split down the middle. And from that crack, the faint sound of a heartbeat could still be heard. Steady, patient, waiting for the final prayer. Episode 20. The Cross That Bled No More. Epilogue. 40 years passed before anyone dared climb the hill again. St. Gabriel's was nothing now, just bones of stone and memory, swallowed by moss and mist. The bell tower had collapsed into itself, the pews were devoured by earth, and the altar where a priest once prayed lay cracked like a ribcage left open to the sky. The villagers no longer spoke of the bleeding cross. They buried that name alongside their fear, telling their children that the church was cursed. But curses fade with time. Curiosity does not. So when Father Miguel arrived, a young priest with kind eyes and untested faith, he was told only one thing: don't ring the bells. He came not to bless the ruins, but to understand them, to sift through ashes and superstition and find what truth, if any, still lingered. He believed that every haunting had a reason, every miracle a cause. That belief began to die the moment he stepped inside. The air was cold, though it was summer, and in that cold he smelled it. Iron and wax, faint but undeniable. He found the altar first, half buried in debris. Beneath it, a shape lay hidden under centuries of dust. A crucifix, broken, blackened with age. The nails were rusted, the wood splintered. It no longer bled. Miguel lifted it carefully, brushing the dirt away. He thought of restoring it, of bringing it down to the village where faith had long gone quiet. But as his fingers traced the grain of the wood, something inside him faltered. The face of the carved Christ was wrong, too human, too knowing. The eyes seemed to follow him even in ruin. And then, beneath the crucifix, he found something else. A book. Its leather cover had cracked with time, yet the title was still visible beneath the grime. Liber Peccatorum Non Scriptum, the book of unwritten sins. He opened it. Every page was blank, until the last. There, written in fresh ink, were 6 words. The cross will bleed for you. Miguel froze. The ink was still wet. He looked up sharply, heart pounding. The ruins were silent, the forest beyond still. But the light had changed, soft and red, as though the sun itself were bleeding through the clouds. And then he heard it. A drop. One. Then another. He turned toward the altar. The sound came from the crucifix in his hands. From a small crack along the carved wrist, a single drop of blood fell, landing silently on the stone. It spread slowly, forming a shape, a handprint, reaching upward. Miguel staggered back, the crucifix trembling in his grip. His lips moved, forming a prayer he'd known since childhood. But the words came out wrong. Backward. Agnus Dei, Catalis Peccata Mundi. The wind carried his voice into the ruins, echoing against the hollow walls like the start of a song long forgotten. The blood on the floor pulsed once, then stilled. When the villagers climbed the hill days later, they found the church unchanged. Except for one thing. The crucifix lay upright on the altar again, its wood whole, its face serene. And beneath it knelt Father Miguel, motionless, his eyes open, his mouth curved in a faint smile, as if caught mid-prayer. From the center of his chest, through the fabric of his cassock, a thin line of red trickled down to the floor, pooling in the shape of a cross. That night, the wind returned to the valley, carrying with it the sound of a bell ringing, 3 times, slow and steady. No one had touched the ropes in 40 years. And though no one was there to see it, a single drop of blood slid down the arm of the crucifix once more, soundless, endless, as the cross began to bleed again, the cross that bled in silence. It only stopped when no one was left to pray.
Epilogue: the silence after the prayer. The ruins of St. Gabriel's remain. They stand at the edge of the forgotten valley, a skeleton of stone half swallowed by ivy, where the wind hums hymns that no one remembers the words to. No one goes there anymore, not because of fear, because of reverence. The villagers say that when the mist rolls down from the mountains at dusk, you can still see a faint red glow beneath the old altar. Some claim it's just the sun's last light caught in the cracks of the stone. But those who listen closely hear something else. A heartbeat. Slow, steady, patient. The cross that once bled in silence lies half buried beneath moss, its surface cold and smooth. Yet on nights when the moon hides, it glistens faintly as if it remembers what it was. And sometimes it weeps again. Not blood, but tears of water clear as glass, pooling at its base before vanishing into the earth. No one has ever found Father Elias's grave, but children born in the valley grow up whispering his name in their prayers, though they don't know who he was. Their parents tell them not to. Still, they do. And every few decades, a stranger comes, always a priest, always alone, drawn by a dream of a bleeding cross, of voices calling from the dark. They arrive with faith in their hearts and leave in silence. Some never leave at all. It is said that faith never dies, it simply changes shape. Perhaps the cross learned that too, for in the stillness of the ruins, there is peace now. Not holy, not damned, just peace. The kind that follows after every scream, every confession, every unanswered prayer. The kind that waits. And if you ever stand before the ruins of St. Gabriel's at twilight, you might feel it too. A warmth on your hands, a drop on your skin, and the faint echo of a voice, gentle, sorrowful, eternal, whispering through the wind. He bled once for mercy, and forever for love. Then the sound fades, and silence returns. The same silence that has watched for centuries. The same silence that will wait for the next believer to kneel, the next sinner to speak, and the next cross to bleed again.